Sailors aboard the USS Arizona who never could forget the USS Vestal crewmen who saved their lives in the opening moments of the attack that Sunday morning in Hawaii. They were alive because Joe George's compassion overruled a direct order from a superior officer. They just didn't know their rescuer's name. Donald Stratton was burned over roughly 70% of his body when the Arizona exploded into a fireball on December 7, 1941. When he got off the Vestal and to a Navy hospital, this is what his body looked like, according to a recreation of the burns and wounds he suffered. It isn't pretty, but it is the reality of how severely injured the final 6 men to get off the battleship were. Donald Stratton, who survived that morning thanks to Joe George, spent a year in the hospital, but returned to fight again in World War II. Stratton went on to have a large family with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. He would always wonder who that sailor was who rescued the final 6 men off the USS Arizona during the height of the attack on Pearl Harbor. He never got the USS Vestal crewman's name or saw him ever again. December 7, 1941 was just too chaotic for introductions. If Joe George hadn't disobeyed an order, Donald Stratton's family would not exist. Lives would not have been lived. It was the same for the other 5 Arizona survivors who were rescued. Like his father, Donald Stratton's son Randy had always wondered who had saved his dad and the other Arizona sailors. So as the 21st century dawned, Randy felt it was finally time to do some serious digging. Randy Stratton also believed this heroic USS Vestal sailor warranted more than just a thank you from the families of the survivors. He also deserved a medal for his heroics at Pearl Harbor, something he never received. A vague commendation in an old logbook was not going to suffice.
What do you do for somebody who saves your dad's life? What do you do? I mean, you want to honor them. That's what we wanted to do.
Well, there was just an inner circle that talked about this sailor that threw the line and whatever, and we got a second chance at life. He helped you get it. I mean, if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't be here today talking about this. We're lucky to be alive, and we're lucky to have a family, and we're lucky that we're still here on Earth.
Around the 60th anniversary of the attack in 2001, the search for Pearl Harbor's unknown hero ramped up for the Stratton family. With help from Daniel Martinez at the Valor in the Pacific National Monument and the Arizona Reunion Association, the Strattons eventually learned their heroic sailor's name on the USS Vestal that morning was Joe George, and he lived somewhere in the United States. Well, it was a start. Dozens of phone calls were made. Hundreds of internet searches were undertaken. All of the inquiries resulted in dead ends, until a lead finally materialized. Randy Stratton came across the name Joe George in Arkansas. A message was left on an answering machine, and fingers were crossed. 2 weeks later, Randy Stratton's voice message was returned. Thelma George was on the other end of the line. And yes, she was married to a sailor named Joe George, who served aboard the repair ship USS Vestal at Pearl Harbor. The Strattons had found their Joe George. Their relation was short-lived as Thelma broke the sad news that her husband had passed away 5 years earlier. Following World War II, Joe and Thelma married and had 2 daughters, Frances Lou and Joanne, both of whom had little idea that their father was one of the heroes of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941.
I don't really know when all the stories started coming out, and I knew about Randy Stratton, who he was, and that his father was on the Arizona, because his mother would say that.
The years ticked by. Randy Stratton would call Thelma George every December 7th with updates on his efforts to get Joe George that medal. Stratton, however, could gain no traction or momentum in his efforts. Thelma George passed away in 2015. It was then that Joanne George Taylor picked up the torch to help the Stratton family in their mission to get her father a medal for his heroics at Pearl Harbor. At the beginning, Joanne had no idea the impact her father had had on future generations of the families of the men he had saved, such as Arizona crewman Donald Stratton.
Yeah, because that's my three grandkids. I mean, I wouldn't be here. My brother wouldn't be here. My 2 sisters wouldn't be here. I mean, all those things go through your mind when you look at how overwhelming that it was that Joe stepped forward to the brave. How many guys, I look back and I think, when you look out over there and you think, wow, just think what that would have been like that day, of all the fire and then him being burned as bad as what he was, and Joe didn't have to do what he did, but he stepped forward. How many people step forward? There's not very many that'll do that, and he's the one that did.
To Randy Stratton, Joe George, that rambunctious, hard-drinking, hard-fighting, and hard-headed sailor aboard the USS Vestal, was a hero any way you looked at it. And not just because one of the men he saved that day was Donald Stratton.
I'm old enough to know that, when you're in that period of your life, you can do rebellious things, and you can regret them, but you do them, and he did. Randy said that to me. He said, Joanne, it's part of who he is and what makes him the man that he is. And when I thought about that and gave it thought, he's completely right. I mean, that's just part of the man that made him be the one that wanted to rescue those men, isn't it? And the Strattons, they're this wonderful family, and I just think, oh my goodness, my father saved that life for that man. It is completely overwhelming. And to read their books and hear about their lives, you know what it does? It makes me, I love the Strattons, and it has made me bond with them in a way where I just love them. To think that, first off, that my father rescued that wonderful man. My father was the most unpretentious man. He wore dungarees all the time, those Navy things. He always bought them at the PX and he always wore Navy regulation jeans. And my mother would try to get him to dress up, and that was a hard thing to do. My father was a very simple man that way. No, he would not like recognition.
We're here on account of him. And my sons and my family and my granddaughters and whatever. And I'm still alive.
Early in the process, Randy Stratton and his family discovered that wanting a medal for Joe George and actually getting one would not be as easy as they thought. There were many factors at play, one being the need for an official eyewitness statement from an officer on the USS Vestal. None were still alive. Another issue was the military politics of awarding a medal to a man who wasn't exactly a poster boy for model Navy behavior. Joe George had, after all, disobeyed an order from a commanding officer, despite the fact that he saved 6 lives on December 7th, 1941.
And that's probably not the kind of person they want to say, good job. good job, guy. They got to put that aside, though, and see the act that he did. To me, that's what they should do.
The Strattons' pursuit of a medal for Joe George continued to hit political and military roadblocks, right up until the 75th anniversary of the Pearl Harbor attack in 2016. By this time, roughly 15 years had passed since Randy Stratton first began his mission. United States Navy Lieutenant Junior Grade Matt Pravitz, who had heard the story of Joe George from someone, met the Stratton family in Hawaii. He felt strongly that Joe George did indeed deserve recognition for his courage at Pearl Harbor and for saving the last 6 sailors off the USS Arizona. He promised to help the Strattons navigate the military and political beltway in Washington, D.C. He also felt a visit to the nation's capital for Joanne Taylor, the Arizona families, and 2 of the final 6 survivors to get off the battleship alive that Sunday morning might move the award needle forward. Meetings with the right people in both military and political circles would go a long way in putting Joe George's story at the top of some key agendas.
There's an emotional power to this story, but there's also enough factual parts and pieces to make the case for it. So now it's just figuring out the right way to move the pieces. All the pieces are together. Now you have to make the puzzle work. So I believe it's close.
On a beautiful summer's day in Washington, D.C., and with a Capitol Police motorcade, the last-ditch effort to get Joe George his long-sought-after medal began. When USS Arizona survivors like Don Stratton and Lauren Bruner are in town, D.C. rolls out the red carpet. There's a visit to the National World War II Memorial.
Everybody had a place to be. Everybody had to be someplace. And that's what put it all together, and this is the outcome. But we lost a lot of people.
It was down to business quickly for the Arizona survivors as their motorcade wound its way to Capitol Hill. First up, a meeting with Cory Gardner, a United States Senator from Stratton's home state of Colorado.
Well, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your incredible service to our country. And so, what a pleasure it is, an honor it is to have you here in this office, and to know that you are living legacies of freedom and everything this country stands for. We got to make this happen. Tell me a little bit about Joe.
He was probably the only guy who could have got that line over to us, and we went across and he'd say, "Come on, kid, you can make it. Come on, kid, you can make it."
This I mean, you think about what that day has meant to our country and your service, and the fact that we can talk about that moment today and Joe and his family here means so much to all of us.
But we try to forget it and get on with our lives, but it always comes back.
Maybe he wasn't the best person in the world that you think he is, but what he did is what he did, and that was save 6 people's lives that went on to have a whole life. I mean, these men are 95 and 96. They went on to have a whole full life because my father did that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have. But inside of me, I'm just beyond thrilled that they're willing to speak up, and that they're willing to get on an airplane at their age and fly to Washington. That has to be exhausting to them, to do that, to try to tell people that can make a decision about that, look, he deserves this, give him a medal, he deserves to be recognized for them. And that's overwhelming to me, and I appreciate it.
Down the hall from Gardner's office is the office of Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, who represents the state bearing the name of the survivors' battleship.
Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
It's an honor for me to be here and to receive you in the office here. So it's important to you that this man receive the honors that he's due.
Absolutely. It's long overdue.
Long.
Another fellow Arizona crewman, Ken Potts, had also joined the others in Washington to aid their efforts to honor Joe George. Following their Capitol Hill visit, the Arizona survivors then laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier.
It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for being here.
After Arlington came one of the most important stops for the families and survivors on their trip to Washington, D.C. to seek support for their Joe George medal effort, the Pentagon. There, for the first time in the memory of those who work inside this massive building, hundreds of military members line the hallways to welcome and honor the handful of remaining USS Arizona crewmen still living. At the Pentagon, the survivors and family met with Secretary of Defense General James Mattis, as well as with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Chief of Naval Operations. There, they shared the story of Pearl Harbor's unknown hero.
They ask for nothing, which is why you just want to give them everything. And I think the power of the story here is that they're not seeking this recognition. They didn't make this trip for themselves. They're heroes. They've defended our nation. They've bled for us. And so they deserve to be recognized, but they don't want the recognition for them. They want it for Joe, which, if you think about it, it took them 50 years to find Joe, and now they spent 25 trying to recognize him. And at 95 and 96, they're willing to make the trek here just to make the case. I think that's a very powerful story about, about selflessness, right? And about sacrifice and about honor, courage, and commitment, which is really what the Navy's all about.
All the military and everybody was standing around clapping when we were walking through the Pentagon there. And there's a lot of other people that deserve that more than I, but we'll enjoy it and make the most of it on the time.
Following the Pentagon visit came the survivors' final stop of the day, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, the White House. The group settled into the Roosevelt Room for a briefing with staff. After that, it was a few short steps into the Oval Office where the man of the Arizona and Team Joe George met with the President of the United States.
Today it's my distinct privilege to welcome to the White House 3 of the 5 living survivors of the USS Arizona. Lauren Brunner and Donald Stratton were on the deck of the USS Arizona doing their duty when the ship was engulfed by massive flames. They were both fortunate enough to be rescued by another courageous hero, Joe George, whose daughter Joanne is with us today.
The president doesn't have to see us, and the senators didn't have to see us today. So if they listen to the story, good, and I hope it goes into their heart the way those men want it to, because you can watch them and see sincerely they want that to happen.
This is considered one of the shortest commutes in D.C.
A personal tour of the White House followed the group's visit with President Trump.
This room is called the Map Room. It's called the Map Room because this is where President Franklin Roosevelt basically monitored and planned World War II from this room. On this wall, there's a watercolor and oil painting of what the room would have looked like. The walls, the exterior walls would have been lined with campaign maps, maps of Europe, maps of the Pacific. It was inspired by the war rooms that Winston Churchill had in London, England.
One of the most spectacular days I've ever spent in my whole life.
Don and Vilma, they don't like to go anywhere anymore. And I know why he's doing this, because I know them now very well. And they don't like to travel and go places anymore. So for them to get in a car, they drove 2 hours, fly on an airplane all the way across the country to tell somebody, please give this man a medal he deserves. I mean, that's just phenomenal when you think about it.
A quick stop at Fort Myer wrapped up the USS Arizona Survivors Tour.
Does anyone know what the comparison horse, riderless horse is?
In these stables live the horses who lead the funeral processions at Arlington, where tens of thousands of World War II veterans are buried.
This trip was about Joe George and about bringing the survivors together again, because none of them had ever been here. Seeing the nation's capital, seeing the monuments that are here, and paying respects to those that are honored here, both at Arlington and with the other monuments.
Their time in Washington, D.C. over, now came the waiting and wondering. Was the effort in Washington worth it? Would someone in the military or on Capitol Hill step up to see that Joe George was finally recognized for his heroic actions aboard the USS Vestal on December 7, 1941?
You write your senator, your congressman, and they say, good job, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And then somebody writes you a letter back and says, but nothing, it kind of stops, you know what I mean? So you do get frustrated, and kudos to Randy Stratton for continuing to trying and trying and trying. But it's not easy because you get very discouraged.
Committed to honoring Joe and why I raised.
As the weeks following their trip to Washington passed, there were small signs of progress. A resolution on the floor of the Senate by Arizona's Jeff Flake.
And it is long overdue that the Senate, the United States Navy, and a grateful nation honor the heroism of Bosun Mate Second Class Joe Leon George.
The hope was, if all went well, to have a medal presentation on the USS Arizona on the anniversary date in December. But that was now looking very doubtful. It took one final appeal from USS Arizona survivor Donald Stratton to move the ball forward. Stratton invited Colorado Senator Cory Gardner to his Colorado Springs home in the fall for a final pitch.
On this Veterans Day, one vet in Colorado Springs got a special visit from Senator Cory Gardner.
Gardner left Stratton's house with a promise that he would try to get things moving again with the military and his fellow politicians. The senator did.
I mean, Don wants this a lot. It is like, have you been listening to me all these years? I'm trying to tell you why I'm here and who saved me. And he's been saying that for a long time. And he wants to be heard. That's why he's out here. I know that. And I so appreciate that.
Just before Thanksgiving, Joanne Taylor received a phone call from the Chief of Naval Operations Awards Branch. The Navy had finally approved a medal for USS Vestal Boatswain's Mate Second Class Joe George, that rebellious sailor who disobeyed an order to cut the lines from his burning ship to the USS Arizona on December 7, 1941, and by doing so, saved the lives of the last 6 men to get off the battleship. Joe George would be posthumously awarded the Bronze Star with a V attached for valor. All the years of persistence had been rewarded. The ceremony at Pearl Harbor was now officially on.
I tell you, I'm almost numb. I'm really almost numb because it just all seems so real.
I mean, 16 years of waiting, it was well worth it.
On an early December morning, Joanne Taylor's family, the Strattons, and Lauren Bruner left for Hawaii to see the completion of their final mission as crewmen aboard the USS Arizona. It would be a first at Pearl Harbor.
You know, I've often said it's one thing to write about history and research history. It's quite another to witness it. For the first time, a medal will be given to a World War II veteran who's no longer here. His daughter will accept it. But it's going to be done on the USS Arizona Memorial. And to our recollection, that has never been done.
Since this would be the final time USS Arizona survivors would return as a group to Hawaii, the long goodbye would include many events, both formal and informal.
Attention on deck!
Some of the lighter moments included Lauren Bruner's return to the official hangout of the Arizona crew prior to December 7, 1941, Smith's Union Bar in Honolulu. the island's oldest drinking establishment. There, on North Hotel Street, he met up with one of the few other crewmen still alive from the battleship, Lou Conter. Memories of the Arizona still line the walls of the old dive on North Hotel Street. The men of Arizona had many beers in this old place. Today, the few survivors return as honored guests.
All right, family, welcome to Blue Hawaiian Helicopters. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be able.
Lauren Bruner and Don Stratton also took in one last aerial view of the Arizona and its memorial with a helicopter tour around Pearl Harbor. There were also book signings, where Don Stratton and Lauren Bruner autographed copies of their own individual accounts of December 7th, 1941, both of which include Joe George's story. But the real reason these Arizona survivors had returned to Pearl Harbor one last time was to honor Joe George, the man who had saved their lives. So late in the afternoon, on the anniversary of the December 7th, 1941 attack, there was one last ceremony on the agenda for the USS Arizona survivors. The Stratton family, Joanne George tailored her own relatives and invited guests. It was finally time, thanks to the efforts and determination of so many, for USS Vestal crewman Joe George to posthumously receive his long overdue medal in recognition of his heroics at Pearl Harbor.
And so an incident that occurred 76 years ago is now going to be, well, it's going to be noted as part of a history that unfolds on that memorial when the medal is given to the daughter. And at that moment, amends are going to be made today. His family will get the medal that he richly deserved. And history will be made, and it won't be forgotten.
Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to a memorable event here in a few moments.
After all these years, Joanne George Taylor's father, Joseph L. George, will be awarded a Bronze Star with V for valor. Sitting in the front row will be two of the men he saved that horrific day off the burning USS Arizona, Donald Stratton and Lauren Bruner. Fellow crewman Lou Conter joins them. The few surviving sailors of the Arizona are about to see their resolve come to fruition.
We're gathered in this very solemn place to recognize the heroism of a man who, for many years, was only known by his actions to 6 USS Arizona sailors. Chief Boatswain's Mate Joseph Leon George's actions have stood the test of time, and through the work of many, have brought us all here together today. For the first and likely only time, a Valor Award will be conferred here at the USS Arizona Memorial. Most fittingly, the award will be bestowed upon a sailor from the USS Vestal who, on that day of infamy, was guided by his conscience and saved the lives of Seaman First Class Harold Kuhn, Seaman First Class Russell Lott, Gunner's Mate Third Class Earl Reiner, Boatswain's Mate Second Class Alvin Dvorak, Seaman First Class Donald Stratton, and Fire Controlman Third Class Lauren Bruner. The effort of so many has brought us together here in this sacred space. A day like this has never been seen before, nor will ever be seen again.
Tonight is not just another ceremony, as if there could ever be such a thing as just another ceremony at Pearl Harbor. Just when you think that something couldn't be more special, we come together this evening. And so welcome to all of you. It is the National Park Service's extreme honor to host, as you've pointed out, an incredibly historic day that may never happen again. And it's a day where I am reminded about doing the right thing. Even when somebody's telling you it's not the right thing, when somebody's telling you not to do it, but you know in your heart of hearts it's the right thing to do, and that you couldn't live with yourself if you did anything else. And so you pick your battle, and you get ready to stand for that battle, and take the consequences later, if there are consequences to come, and you do the right thing. And then, when there are no consequences, but yet the recognition that you should have received for doing the right thing was not quite what it should have been. And your friends go, and they say, that's not right. There should be more recognition. And they're told, no, there was a commendation. Disobeyed an order. You all didn't listen either. And that is another example of doing the right thing.
7 December 1941, 4 to 8 watch. The first thing noted, 7:55, surprise air attack by Japanese planes. Sounded general quarters. 8 o'clock, all guns manned, including 30 caliber machine guns. 8:05, open fire with 3 AA guns, machine guns, Japanese planes and bombers and torpedo planes making runs. 8:30, Arizona was observed to be settling. Fuel oil in the water between the Arizona and Vestal ignited. Vestal's afterlines parted, making preparations to getting underway. 8:45, cut forward lines underway on both engines, no steering gear. Tug pulled Vestal's bow away from the Arizona, Vestal starting to list to the starboard, taking water aft. But something else happened. Something that wasn't in that decalogue. Commended by the commanding officer for outstanding services rendered during the attack on the USS Vestal by the Japanese planes on 7 December 1941. As a member of the deck force in the forward and aft part of the ship, aided men from the USS Arizona, which was afire, in getting over to the Vestal and assisted in this vessel getting clear of the Arizona. That's what that looked like. Don told me this story, and he said, you know, we were burning up there. And they were badly burned. And they really didn't know how bad. But they knew one thing. If they didn't get off that platform, they were not going to make it. They would have been consumed by the flame. They hollered at a man that was aft on the Vestal to get his attention, which they did. It was Joe George, bosun's mate. But how would they get to him? They were 40 feet in the air, nearly 70 feet across. Now, how Joe George threw this 70 feet in one throw is because the man was a boxer, both in the bar and outside. And when he showed me this monkey fist, this was life. So, their story, and I'll bring this out to them, I'll let you hold it during the ceremony. Is part of history that they knew, and the men that saved them through that line. And today we honor that.
I can't imagine being trapped on the USS Arizona while it was engulfed in fire. Minutes must have felt like an eternity. For a single moment, time stood still. in what can only be accounted as divine intervention, the big man from Georgia threw a lifeline to 6 men he never knew. Fast forward 16 years from that day, and we find ourselves in the conversation again. Even now the words echo in my mind. A guy saved my grandpa. For more than half my life, that's what Joe was. A guy. A nameless, faceless hero that I can only thank every night in my prayers. The question was always asked, well, who was he? And always our answer was, if we only knew. We always wondered who the guy was, but in the chaos of December 7th, we weren't really sure if there would be an official record of what happened. And he was pretty sure that none of the men that crossed the line survived. He said that the men looked like ghosts, burnt, blackened from head to toe, only the whites of their eyes visible. A truly ghoulish and unsettling sight, to be sure. We learned that Joe passed away in 1996. And he would never know the men he saved. Had not only survived, but lived. It took some time to process that we would never shake his hand, give him a hug, introduce him to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, generations that he saved. We would never get to say thank you to his face. Just a simple thank you. Joe didn't need to be told what to do. He didn't wait. He didn't kneel expecting something to happen. He acted. He acted with no thought other than saving the men on the Arizona from a horrible death. While we walked away slightly disappointed that nothing was settled, we had more hope than we had in a while. Joanne, without your father's intervention, myself and 4 generations would not be here today. You joined the fight and never gave up. You always had faith that the medal would come at the right time. Finally, I want to thank Joe George. You once said that your conscience was your guide that day. You could have gone about your duties and not looked twice at the men who, according to your commanding officer, were dead already. You could have turned away, but you didn't. You chose the impossible. You chose to stand up for men you didn't even know.
While BMC George is receiving this award posthumously, we're privileged and honored to have his daughter, Ms. Joanne Taylor, here with us to accept the award on behalf of her father. Mrs. Taylor, I know you are very proud of your father, so please accept this award on behalf of a grateful nation and a grateful United States Navy. What makes this ceremony even more special, as we've heard through several of the presentations, is the fact that we have 3 USS Arizona survivors present with us today. Mr. Donald Stratton, Mr. Lauren Bruner, and Mr. Lou Cotner. There could be no greater testament to Joe George's heroism than that of the Stratton and Bruner families.
God knew on that morning of December 7th, 1941, just what was going to happen. And he knew he would have this larger-than-life man, Joe George, my father, in the place he was for a reason, to save these magnificent men. Don Stratton, Lauren Bruner, Alvin Dvorak, Harold Kuhn, Russell Lott, and Earl Reiner, who so desperately needed him in that moment in time. The stories have been told about what was happening to them that fateful morning, their burned bodies, and losing hope that there was going to be any way out to escape that burning inferno of the USS Arizona. My dad, Joe George, stepped up to be the real man he was at the time these survivors so desperately needed him. I am so very proud of him that he did what was right and honorable in that moment in time.
With today's ceremony, we honor Bosun's Mate Chief Joseph George, and we cement his rightful legacy among America's greatest heroes. So now the time is here to present the award that we've all been waiting for.
We made it.
We made it.
Chief George then assisted Vestal in getting clear of the danger posed by Arizona. Were it not for Chief George's actions, all the Arizona sailors would likely have perished. By his initiative, courage, and devotion to duty, Chief George reflected great credit upon himself and upon the highest traditions of the United States.
We did it.
We did it.
We did it.
Finally.
I can't believe it. We did it.
We did it. We did it. Finally.
We did it. My dad would be really proud because he loved the Navy, and he'd be really proud to receive a medal, but he would not, I don't think he would like all the, you know, the hoopla that goes along with receiving the medal. Now, my mother would be overjoyed with that because she loved my daddy so much. There's a part of me that knows that he just would be overwhelmed. I've said before that if he knew I was on this quest for him, he would be saying, Joanne, what are you doing?
We didn't get it done soon enough just so Joe could appreciate it.
A lot of memories.
Well, I knew God had a plan how this was going to pan out. I told Joanne many times, I said, God's going to take care of this. He's going to open up the doors when it needs to be open, and he did.
Of course, Pearl Harbor survivor Joe George would not have wanted a big fuss made over all this. Humble heroes seldom do. He would just say what he did was the correct thing to do. The right man in the right place at the right moment in history, even if it meant disobeying a direct order. On a gray and chilly December day, Joanne Taylor returns to the Little Rock National Cemetery in Arkansas.
I'm so proud
This time, she has brought something with her in a small box. Joe George finally has his Bronze Star Medal with a V for valor. This rambunctious, hard-fighting, hard-drinking sailor aboard the USS Vestal is no longer the forgotten hero of Pearl Harbor. Many generations, here as a result of his actions on the morning of December 7th, 1941, made sure of that.
That is just the best and most wonderful part of it. His legacy is all these people that have come along that are these wonderful families, like the Stratton family, like Lauren, all these people that have come along and forged a life because of my father. So, I mean, that's the most wonderful part of what he did.